My wife looked me straight in the eyes while my 82-year-old mother struggled to breathe and said, "Not my problem. Figure it out yourself." I wish I could tell you I yelled. I wish I could tell you I slammed the door or threw something across the kitchen. Instead, I just stood there for a second staring at the woman I'd been married to for 27 years. Then I nodded once. "Fine." That was all I said. Looking back now, I think my marriage ended in that exact moment. The paperwork just came later. My name is David Harper. I'm 58 years old, retired from UPS after 31 years of loading trucks, driving routes, and putting more miles on my knees than I care to count. My wife Lisa is 54. She works as a financial consultant for a firm in downtown Indianapolis. She's always been organized, ambitious, and good with money. Somewhere along the way, though, organized turned into controlling and ambitious turned into cold. We lived in Carmel, Indiana, about 15 minutes from my mother, Margaret. Mom had been on her own since my dad passed away 7 years earlier. She still insisted on mowing her own little yard and baking pies for the church fundraiser every fall, but age was catching up with her. Her cardiologist had warned us just a month earlier that if she ever had chest pain or shortness of breath, we weren't supposed to wait. That Saturday morning started like any other. I was making scrambled eggs when my phone rang. "David!" I recognized Mom's voice immediately. She sounded weak. I don't feel right." My stomach tightened. "What's going on?" "My chest hurts, and I'm having trouble catching my breath." I didn't ask another question. "I'm coming." I grabbed my keys out of habit before remembering they were useless. My Ford F-150 was sitting at Pearson Ford, getting a new transmission. They'd had it since Thursday. Lisa's Toyota Highlander was parked in the driveway. She was scrolling through her tablet with a cup of coffee beside her. "Lisa," she looked up, "Mom needs to get to IU Health North, right now. Can I take your SUV?" She didn't even blink. "I'm meeting Karen for lunch." "Lunch can wait," she shrugged. "Take an Uber. It's Saturday morning. It'll take forever." She picked up her coffee. "David, that's not my problem." I honestly thought I'd misheard her. "What?" She sighed like I was the one being difficult. "Figure it out yourself." There wasn't any anger in her voice, no yelling, no argument, just complete indifference. For a second, I searched her face, hoping she'd smile and tell me she was kidding. Nothing. I felt something inside me go strangely quiet. Not rage, not heartbreak. Just quiet. I nodded once. "Fine." I opened the Uber app with hands that suddenly didn't feel steady. The estimated wait time flashed across my screen. 23 minutes. It might as well have been 23 hours. Every minute felt stolen. I kept glancing toward the driveway, hoping Lisa might change her mind. She never did. Instead, she picked up her purse, adjusted her sunglasses in the hallway mirror, and walked past me without saying another word. The front door closed. A few seconds later, I heard her Highlander pull away. I stood there alone in my own kitchen, listening to the silence she left behind. Then my phone rang again. It was Mom. I answered before the first ring finished. "Sweetheart," she whispered. "I'm on my way," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. Even though for the first time in nearly 3 decades, I wasn't sure where my wife fit into that sentence anymore. The Uber driver showed up 21 minutes later. His name was Carl, a retired school bus driver with a gray mustache and an old Indianapolis Colts cap that had clearly seen better days. The moment I climbed into the back seat, he looked at me in the rearview mirror. "You okay, buddy?" "My mom's having chest pains." He nodded once and pulled away from the curb. "We'll get there." Those 3 words shouldn't have meant much, but after what had happened in my own kitchen, hearing kindness from a complete stranger almost made my throat tighten. Traffic wasn't terrible, but every red light felt personal. I checked my phone every 30 seconds. Mom texted once, "I'm sorry to bother you." Even then, she was apologizing. I called her immediately. "Mom, stop saying you're sorry. I know you're busy. I'm coming. That's all that matters." She tried to laugh, but it turned into a cough. Carl glanced back again. "Hospital. IU Health North." He pressed a little harder on the gas. "I've been there more times than I wanted with my wife," he said quietly. "Hang in there." We reached Mom's little ranch house just before 10. She was sitting in her recliner, one hand pressed against her chest. The color had drained from her face. When she saw me, she forced a smile. I knew you'd come. I wrapped one arm around her shoulders. We're getting you checked out. I hate making a fuss. Mom, she sighed. I know. Carl jumped out before I could even ask. Together we helped Mom into the back seat. I appreciate this, I told him. He waved me off. My daughter would expect somebody to do the same for me. Simple people still existed. I just hadn't expected one to be sitting behind the wheel of an Uber. The emergency department at IU Health North was busy, but the triage nurse took one look at Mom and brought her straight inside. Within minutes, she was hooked up to monitors. A nurse asked me a dozen questions. Medical history, medications, previous heart issues, emergency contacts. When she asked who else should be notified, I hesitated. My wife, I finally answered. The nurse smiled politely. I'll add her. I pulled out my phone and texted Lisa myself. Mom's at the hospital. They're running tests. No response. 20 minutes passed. Nothing. An hour. Still nothing. Around lunchtime, doctors ordered blood work, a chest x-ray, and a CT scan. One physician, Dr. Patel, spoke carefully. Mr. Harper, we're concerned about possible cardiac complications. We won't know more until the lab results come back. I nodded. Mom looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. The woman who had worked double shifts at a diner after Dad died, who somehow still managed to pack my school lunches every morning, suddenly looked fragile. She reached over and squeezed my hand. David, I'm here. I don't want this causing trouble between you and Lisa. I looked down at our hands. It's not your fault. She smiled faintly. You always try to keep the peace. You got that from your father. Maybe I did. Dad believed arguments usually made things worse. But sitting beside Mom's hospital bed, I couldn't stop replaying the last few years. Lisa complaining every Thanksgiving because Mom came over. Rolling her eyes whenever Mom called. Finding excuses not to visit. Insisting we keep our finances completely separate because, in her words, family creates expensive expectations. At the time, I'd convinced myself it was stress from work. Everyone gets stressed. Everyone has bad days, but bad days don't last for years. The afternoon drifted into evening. Machines beeped steadily. Nurses changed shifts. I bought a stale turkey sandwich from the vending area and barely touched it. Still nothing from Lisa. Not a text, not a call, not even a simple question asking if Mom was okay. By 9 that night, the doctors believed Mom had avoided a major heart attack, but they wanted to keep her overnight for observation. Relief washed over me so suddenly I had to sit down. I stayed another hour until Mom finally dozed off. As I walked through the hospital parking garage toward another Uber, my phone remained completely silent. For the first time in 27 years, going home didn't feel like going home. It felt like returning to a house where someone happened to live. I barely slept that night. The house felt different, not because anything had changed, because something had. Lisa's Highlander was back in the driveway. The television was on in the living room, but she wasn't watching it. She was scrolling through her phone with the volume turned low. She glanced up when I walked in. How's your mom? It wasn't cruel. It wasn't warm either. It sounded like someone asking if it was going to rain tomorrow. They're keeping her overnight. Oh, that was it. No. Is she okay? No. What did the doctor say? Just, oh. I stood there waiting for something else. Nothing came. I'm going to bed, I said. Okay. I climbed the stairs, showered, and lay awake until sometime after 2 in the morning. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mom sitting in that recliner struggling to breathe. And every time I replayed the morning, Lisa's face stayed exactly the same. Calm, detached, like she'd been talking about borrowing a lawnmower instead of helping an 82-year-old woman get to the emergency room. At 6:42 Sunday morning, my phone started vibrating on the nightstand. Lisa. I ignored it. 5 seconds later, another call, then another. By the time I made coffee, she'd called 7 times. She came downstairs wearing sweatpants and looked surprised to see me sitting at the kitchen table. My dad called. I looked up. So, he collapsed. I felt my stomach drop. Frank Miller was 84. Unlike Lisa, I genuinely cared about him. He treated me like family from the day we met. What happened? I don't know, she snapped. He was mowing the lawn and collapsed. Did you call 911? Yes, but... She grabbed her keys from the counter. My SUV won't start. I remembered she'd mentioned the battery acting up a few weeks earlier. I need you to drive me. For just a second, I almost stood up. Frank deserved better. He always had. Then another memory pushed its way into my mind. Saturday morning. Mom needs to get to the hospital. Lunch can wait. Not my problem. Lisa took 2 quick steps toward me. David, come on. I looked at her, really looked at her. There was panic in her eyes, fear, the exact emotions I'd been carrying less than 24 hours earlier. I need your help. I took a slow sip of coffee. My truck's still in the shop. We'll take an Uber. I almost laughed. Yesterday, she'd suggested the exact same thing. Now it suddenly wasn't good enough. The wait could be 20 minutes. I know. My dad doesn't have 20 minutes. I set my mug down. Neither did my mother. The words stayed inside my head. I didn't say them. Lisa was breathing fast now. She picked up her phone again. I'm trying to get my neighbor. No answer. My sister's in Louisville. Another call, straight to voicemail. She looked back at me. Please. That word surprised me. Lisa almost never said please. I stared out the kitchen window. The sky was gray. A light rain had started. Part of me wanted to grab my wallet and help. Not because of Lisa, because of Frank. But another part of me couldn't ignore what had happened less than a day ago. Compassion wasn't supposed to work only one way. Finally, I spoke. I think you'll figure it out. She blinked. What? You told me something yesterday. Her face slowly changed. She knew exactly where this was going. David, you said it wasn't your problem. I didn't mean, you also told me to figure it out. Silence filled the kitchen. Then her phone rang. She answered instantly. What? She listened. Oh, okay. She lowered the phone. The ambulance just got there. I nodded once. Good. She looked back at me, tears beginning to form. You really aren't coming. I didn't answer. She rushed out the front door anyway. A few seconds later, I heard her pounding on the neighbor's door across the street. I looked at my phone. 38 missed calls, every single one from Lisa, for the first time in years. She finally understood what it felt like to ask for help and hear nothing back. I stayed in the kitchen long after Lisa left. The coffee in my mug had gone cold, but I kept staring out the window. Across the street, I saw my neighbor Ron backing his Chevy Silverado out of the driveway. Lisa climbed into the passenger seat, wiping tears from her face. They pulled away fast. I should have felt satisfied. Instead, I felt heavy. Frank didn't deserve any of this. He'd spent 25 years teaching high school history in Fishers. Every Christmas, he'd hand me a gift card to Bass Pro Shops because, in his words, a man can always use another flashlight. He never forgot my birthday. When I retired from UPS, he was the first one to shake my hand and tell me I'd earned every quiet morning ahead. None of this was his fault. That thought stayed with me all morning. Around 10 o'clock, I drove a rental sedan that the dealership had arranged over to the hospital to check on Mom. She looked much better. Some color had returned to her face. Morning, she said with a tired smile. You look better already. I feel better. I poured her a cup of water. The doctor says I might go home tomorrow. That's good news. She studied my face for a few seconds. You didn't sleep. I've had better nights. You and Lisa. Mothers always know. Even at 82, I tried smiling. We're just dealing with some things. She nodded slowly. I've been married. That made me chuckle. You certainly have. She reached over and patted my hand. David. Yeah. Don't let one bad decision define a whole life. I looked away. I don't know if yesterday was one bad decision. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Around lunchtime, my phone buzzed. A text from Lisa. Dad's stable. They're keeping him for observation. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. A minute later, another message arrived. Can we please talk? I put the phone face down. Mom noticed. Everything okay? Frank's going to be all right. Oh, thank goodness, she smiled. I always liked Frank. So did I. That was the problem. I still did. On the drive home, my phone rang again. Lisa. This time I answered. She sounded exhausted. You couldn't even ask how my dad was. I already know. How you texted me. A pause. I need to explain. I'm listening. She took a deep breath. When Dad collapsed, I panicked. I imagine you did. My car wouldn't start. I know. I didn't know what to do. Neither did I yesterday. Again, I kept the thought to myself. She continued. The ambulance got there in about 6 minutes. That surprised me. So you weren't waiting for transportation? No. You were already on the phone with 911. Yes. I frowned. Then why did you need me so badly? Silence. Long enough to tell me everything. Finally, she answered. I didn't want to be alone. Those words hit me differently than I'd expected. Not because they made me sympathetic, because they made something crystal clear. Yesterday, when my mother needed help getting to the hospital, Lisa had refused to stand beside me. Today, her father had professional help within minutes. What she wanted wasn't a ride. She wanted comfort, support, someone to carry part of her fear. Exactly what she denied me less than 24 hours earlier. I leaned back in the driver's seat after pulling into my driveway. So this wasn't really about transportation. No, it was about having someone there. Another pause. Yes. I closed my eyes. The anger I'd been carrying since Saturday morning suddenly changed shape. It wasn't as sharp anymore. It was colder, quieter, because I finally understood what hurt the most. It had never been about the keys to her Highlander. It was the complete absence of compassion. Once I saw that I couldn't unsee it. Whatever was left of our marriage had cracked somewhere deep beneath the surface. And I had the feeling I was only beginning to discover how long those cracks had been there. The next morning, after dropping off a fresh change of clothes for Mom at the hospital, I stopped at a small diner off Main Street in Carmel. It was the kind of place where the waitress called everyone honey, and the coffee cup never stayed empty for long. I needed to think. Instead of rushing home, I sat in the corner booth with scrambled eggs growing cold in front of me. For 27 years, whenever Lisa and I hit a rough patch, I'd always found a reason to excuse it. She was under pressure at work. She was tired. She didn't mean it. This time, those excuses felt worn out. My phone buzzed. It wasn't Lisa. It was Frank. I answered immediately. Frank, how are you feeling? His familiar laugh came through the speaker, weaker than usual, but unmistakably his. I've been better. What happened? They think I got dehydrated. My blood pressure dropped while I was mowing. He chuckled softly. Guess I'm not 35 anymore. I was worried sick. I appreciate that. We talked for a few minutes about the hospital food baseball and how stubborn old men never listen to their doctors. Then he asked something that caught me off guard. Lisa told me you two had a disagreement. I chose my words carefully. We did. He waited. I knew he wasn't asking for details. He was giving me a chance to volunteer them. I didn't. Well, he finally said, don't stay mad forever. I'll think about it. After we hung up, I stared at my reflection in the diner's window. I hadn't lied, but I hadn't told him the truth either. Not yet. When I got home, Lisa's car was in the driveway. She was sitting at the kitchen island. No makeup. Hair pulled back. She looked exhausted. I've been waiting. I can see that. She stood slowly. I'm sorry. I said nothing. I was selfish. Still nothing. I don't know why I acted like that. You don't. She shook her head. I've had a lot going on. Everyone does. I know. For a second, I almost believed she was finally taking responsibility. Then came the sentence I should have expected. I've just been under so much stress at work. There it was. Not an explanation. An excuse. She kept talking. My clients, my deadlines, everything has been piling up. I listened quietly. She blamed work. Then she blamed lack of sleep. Then she blamed anxiety. At one point, she even laughed nervously and said, maybe I'm just getting older. Not once did she say the words I'd been waiting to hear. I chose to hurt you. Because that's what had happened. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't stress. It was a choice. That afternoon, while Lisa went upstairs to shower, I sat down at my computer to pay a few bills. Our checking account looked normal. Out of habit, I logged into the shared financial dashboard Lisa had set up years ago. Something caught my eye. One account I remembered seeing every month was gone. At first, I assumed she'd simply moved it. I searched. Nothing. Then I opened several monthly statements I'd never bothered reading before. One transfer, then another, then another. Over nearly 8 months. Small enough that most people wouldn't notice. $5,000? $3,000? $7,500. The total made me lean back in my chair. Nearly $180,000 had been moved into an account I didn't recognize. I checked the account holder. Only one name appeared. Lisa Miller Harper. Not ours. Hers. My pulse started to climb. Then I noticed another folder she'd accidentally left synced to our shared cloud storage. Inside were PDFs, emails, a consultation invoice from a divorce attorney in Indianapolis, a mortgage pre-approval, listings for condominiums near Sarasota, Florida. One email from a realtor stood out. Looking forward to helping you start your next chapter. I read that sentence 3 times. Suddenly, Saturday morning looked completely different. This wasn't a marriage that had fallen apart overnight. Lisa had already been planning a future without me. Her refusal to help my mother hadn't created the distance between us. It had simply exposed how far apart we'd already become. I closed the laptop. For the first time since all of this began, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I just wasn't looking forward to doing it. I didn't call a lawyer that afternoon. I waited. Not because I had changed my mind, because I wanted one full day to cool off before making a decision that couldn't be undone. After 30 years of marriage, people deserve at least one night to think. So I mowed the lawn, changed the air filter in the furnace, stopped by the grocery store, and bought the chicken noodle soup Mom liked. I kept myself busy because I knew the second I sat still, my mind would start racing again. Lisa tried talking to me twice. The first time she found me in the garage. "Can we please have dinner together? I'm not hungry. You haven't really eaten. I'll survive." She stood there awkwardly rubbing her hands together. "I hate this." I looked up from the toolbox I'd been organizing. "You hate this." She nodded. "I've never seen you shut me out before." I almost smiled. "No, usually I keep trying to fix things." She didn't answer, because we both knew it was true. The next morning after visiting Mom, I drove to a law office in downtown Noblesville. The attorney's name was Rebecca Collins. She looked to be in her early 60s with silver hair and reading glasses balanced halfway down her nose. After listening to me for nearly 40 minutes, she folded her hands on her desk. "So let me make sure I understand." She glanced at her notes. "Your concern isn't simply your wife's behavior during your mother's emergency?" "No, it's the pattern." "Exactly. And now you've discovered she's been moving substantial amounts of money into an account in her name alone while consulting a divorce attorney." "That's right." Rebecca nodded slowly. "You've done the hardest part already." "I have." "You've stopped making excuses." That sentence stayed with me. For years, I'd been explaining Lisa's behavior instead of seeing it. Rebecca gave me a checklist: financial records, property documents, retirement accounts, insurance policies. "Don't confront her yet," she advised. "Why not?" "Because once people realize they're losing control of the situation, they often make emotional decisions." That sounded exactly like Lisa. Over the next week, I quietly gathered paperwork. Not by snooping, by collecting copies of documents I had every legal right to access: tax returns, bank statements, retirement balances, vehicle titles. One evening, I was organizing everything in a file box when Lisa walked into the home office. "What are you doing?" "Getting organized," she laughed nervously. "Since when?" "Since I realized someone else already has been." She frowned. "What does that mean?" I met her eyes. "I know about the account." Every bit of color disappeared from her face. "What account?" "The one with nearly $180,000 in it." She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "David, I know about Sarasota." Her shoulders dropped. "I can explain. I've read the emails. It's not what you think." I let out a quiet breath. "I've noticed those words usually mean it's exactly what I think." She sat down across from me. "I wasn't sure I wanted a divorce." "So you interviewed lawyers anyway?" "I just wanted information." "And the condo?" "I was considering my options." I nodded slowly. While I was considering how to get my mother to the hospital, tears welled up in her eyes. I know I hurt you. Yes. I'm sorry. I believe you are. She looked surprised. You do? I believe you're sorry. Hope flickered across her face. Then I finished the sentence. I just don't believe you're sorry until there were consequences. The hope vanished. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I slid a large manila envelope across the desk. She looked down at it. What is this? Open it. Her hands trembled as she pulled out the papers. She only had to read the first page. Petition for dissolution of marriage. She stared at it as if the words might rearrange themselves. No. Her voice barely came out. No. David. I stayed calm. There wasn't any satisfaction in the moment, just certainty. I've already signed. She looked up, tears running freely now. You can't do this. I stood. I didn't do this. For the first time since I'd known her, Lisa had absolutely nothing to say. The divorce papers changed everything. Not overnight, not magically. But the balance of our relationship shifted in a way I'd never experienced before. For years, I'd been the one trying to smooth things over after every disagreement. I was the first to apologize even when I wasn't sure I'd done anything wrong. I was the one suggesting weekends away, date nights, counseling, anything to keep us moving forward. Now I stopped chasing, and Lisa didn't know what to do. The next few days were strangely quiet. She slept in the guest room. The television stayed off. Neither of us had much to say over breakfast. One evening, I was watering the flowers Mom had planted years earlier when Lisa stepped onto the patio. I talked to my attorney. I nodded without looking up. I figured you would. He thinks we're making a mistake. I smiled faintly. I imagine mine disagrees. She folded her arms. You really won't reconsider. I already have. I mean now. I know what you mean. She walked closer. I've said I'm sorry. You have. I don't know what else you want. That question lingered in the air. I set the watering can down. The truth. She frowned. I've told you the truth. No. I turned toward her. You've told me pieces of it. She looked away. What pieces are missing? When did you stop seeing us as a team? She didn't answer. When did helping my mother become optional? Silence. When did you decide planning a new life was easier than fixing the one we had? Her eyes filled again. I don't know. This time, I believed her. Sometimes people drift so slowly they can't point to the exact mile marker where they lost the road. A week later, Mom was finally home. She insisted she didn't need anyone staying overnight. I've lived by myself for 7 years, she reminded me. I know. I'm tougher than I look. That's never been in question. She smiled. I raised you to be stubborn. You succeeded. As I was leaving, she stopped me. Frank called. He did. He wanted to check on me. That sounded exactly like Frank. He asked if you were all right too. I nodded. He's a good man. The best. She studied me for a moment. Don't punish him for someone else's choices. I won't. And I meant it. 3 days later, Frank invited both of us to his 85th birthday dinner. A small gathering, just immediate family. His favorite Italian restaurant in Fishers. Lisa asked if I was going. I wouldn't miss Frank's birthday. She seemed relieved. For the first time in weeks, she smiled. I think this could be good for us. I didn't respond. She mistook my silence for hope. It wasn't. The restaurant was busy that Saturday evening. About a dozen family members filled the private dining room. Frank looked healthier than I'd expected. He hugged me the moment I walked in. Good to see you, son. He'd called me that for nearly 3 decades. It made what was coming even harder. Dinner started pleasantly. People laughed. Grandkids ran around between the tables. Someone joked that Frank had scared everyone just to get extra birthday presents. Even Frank laughed at that. Halfway through dessert, he tapped his water glass with a spoon. I've got one birthday wish. The room quieted. I'd like my daughter and David to work things out. Every eye in the room turned toward us. Lisa reached for my hand under the table. I gently moved mine away. Frank looked confused. What's going on? Nobody spoke. Finally, he looked directly at me. David. I took a slow breath. I hadn't planned to say anything tonight, but he had asked. And after everything that had happened, he deserved an honest answer. I folded my napkin, set it beside my plate, and looked around the table. Frank, if I'm going to answer that question, I paused. Everyone here deserves to hear the truth. I looked at Frank first. He deserved that much. I've been trying to figure out how to explain this without embarrassing anybody, I said. The truth is, I don't think that's possible anymore. The room went quiet. Even the grandkids seemed to sense something serious was happening. Lisa leaned toward me. David, please. I shook my head. You asked me to come tonight. Your dad asked me a question. I'm going to answer it. Frank frowned. Son, what's this about? I took a slow breath. Last Saturday morning, my mom called me. I glanced at Mom, who was sitting beside my aunt. She was having chest pain and couldn't catch her breath. Frank's smile disappeared. I didn't have my truck because it was in the shop. He nodded. So I asked Lisa if I could take her Highlander. Lisa whispered, please don't. I continued anyway. She looked at me and said, not my problem. Figure it out yourself. The table fell completely silent. Nobody reached for a drink. Nobody picked up a fork. Frank slowly turned toward his daughter. Lisa. She stared down at her plate. I panicked. I wasn't angry anymore. I simply kept telling the story. I waited over 20 minutes for an Uber. A stranger helped me get my mother into the car. We spent the entire day at IU Health North. I looked back at Frank. The next morning, your daughter called me 38 times. He blinked. 38. Your blood pressure dropped while you were mowing. Her SUV wouldn't start. Frank nodded slowly. I remember. She wanted me to come because she didn't want to be alone. Lisa covered her face with both hands. I realized something that morning. I looked around the room. My mother needed help getting to the hospital. I paused. Your daughter needed emotional support. Another pause. She was willing to deny me compassion until she needed it herself. No one interrupted. Frank looked heartbroken. Finally, he spoke. Lisa. She still couldn't look up. Is that true? A long silence followed. Then she nodded. Yes. Her voice cracked. It's true. Frank closed his eyes for several seconds. When he opened them again, they looked older somehow. I didn't raise you that way. Nobody moved. He wasn't shouting. That somehow made it even more powerful. I taught history for 25 years. He looked directly at Lisa. I always told my students that character isn't measured when life is easy. His voice stayed calm. It's measured by how you treat people when they need you. A tear rolled down Lisa's cheek. I'm sorry, Dad. I believe you are. He sighed. But being sorry doesn't erase what happened. The room remained silent. Then Frank surprised everyone. He stood up, walked around the table, and stopped beside me. He put one hand on my shoulder. I owe you an apology. You don't. I do. You didn't tell her to say those things. No. His eyes watered. But she's my daughter. I stood and shook my head. You've been nothing but good to me. He pulled me into a hug. I hope someday you'll forgive this family. I hugged him back. I already forgave the family. When we stepped apart, I looked toward Lisa. I just can't stay in the marriage. She finally met my eyes. For the first time in weeks, she didn't argue. She didn't blame work. She didn't blame stress. She didn't offer another excuse. She simply nodded. I think she finally understood. Not why I was leaving, but why I had to. When dinner ended, several relatives quietly came over to hug Mom. Others shook my hand. No one celebrated. There was no cheering, no dramatic scene, just the heavy silence that comes when the truth finally enters a room where everyone has been avoiding it. And somehow, that felt like justice. Life settled into a different rhythm after that dinner. The divorce moved forward without the shouting matches people expect. There were meetings with attorneys, stacks of paperwork, more signatures than I thought two people could produce in a lifetime. Every now and then Lisa would ask if I'd changed my mind. The answer never changed. No. Not because I hated her, because I finally respected myself enough not to pretend everything was fine. One afternoon, Rebecca called with good news. The financial records worked in your favor. What does that mean? It means the court wasn't impressed with the money transfers. Apparently, Lisa's attempt to quietly move nearly $180,000 into an account under her name alone hadn't gone unnoticed. Since most of those funds had come from marital assets, the judge ordered everything disclosed and accounted for. The Sarasota condo she'd been planning, that dream disappeared almost overnight. The reservation deposit was gone. The mortgage approval expired. The whole plan unraveled before it ever became real. When Rebecca told me I didn't celebrate, I simply thanked her. Winning wasn't the point anymore. The point was making sure honesty mattered. About a month later, I finally got my truck back. When the mechanic handed me the keys to my old blue F-15, I smiled for the first time in weeks. "Runs like new," he said. "I hope so," he laughed. "Transmission ought to outlive both of us." I wasn't so sure about that, but hearing the engine start felt strangely comforting. Some things could still be repaired. Mom recovered better than anyone expected. She started walking around the neighborhood again, slowly, one block at a time. Every Tuesday morning, I'd drive her to Bible study at church. Every Thursday, we'd stop at the same little bakery afterward. She always ordered half a cinnamon roll, never a whole one. "The doctor says moderation," she'd tell me. Then she'd slide half of it onto my plate. Some habits never change. Frank called every Sunday afternoon. Sometimes we talked about baseball, sometimes fishing, sometimes absolutely nothing important. One afternoon, he surprised me. I volunteered. For what? Our church started a transportation ministry. I smiled. So did ours. He laughed. Guess old men need something to keep us busy. Within a few weeks, I found myself driving seniors to doctor's appointments, physical therapy sessions, and grocery stores. Mrs. Jenkins needed rides to dialysis. Mr. Alvarez had cataract surgery and couldn't drive for a while. None of it felt like charity. It felt like neighbors taking care of neighbors, exactly the way life should work. I heard through mutual friends that Lisa had moved into a townhouse on the north side of Indianapolis. She was still working, still successful, still busy. I wished her well, and I meant that. Holding on to anger would have only kept me tied to a chapter I'd already finished reading. A few months after everything was finalized, I ran into her unexpectedly at a Home Depot. We almost passed each other in the garden section. She stopped first. "David." "Hi, Lisa." She looked different, not older, quieter. "How's your mom? Doing well?" "I'm glad." We stood there awkwardly for a moment. Then she said something I hadn't expected. "I've been volunteering at St. Vincent Hospital." I looked at her. "As a patient escort." She gave a small smile. "I spend most Saturdays helping elderly patients get where they need to go." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I nodded. "I think that's a good thing." "So do I." She looked like she wanted to say more. Instead, she simply said goodbye and walked away. I watched her disappear around the end of the aisle. People can change. Sometimes they do it too late to save a relationship, but not too late to become a better person. And honestly, I hope that's exactly what happened for her. 6 months have a funny way of changing what matters. For a long time, I thought I'd always remember the exact words Lisa said that Saturday morning. Eventually, I stopped hearing them. What I remembered instead was Carl, the Uber driver, telling me, "We'll get there." I remembered the nurse who squeezed my shoulder while the doctor explained Mom's test results. I remembered Frank putting his hand on my shoulder at his birthday dinner. When enough good people show up in your life, they slowly drown out the voices that once hurt you. Mom turned 83 in the spring. We celebrated with fried chicken from her favorite little place in Westfield potato salad. She insisted on making herself and a chocolate cake my granddaughter decorated with far too much frosting. She laughed harder than I'd heard in years. Watching her blow out the candles, I realized something. I'd almost lost her. And if I had spent the rest of my life regretting that Saturday, I would have been giving one terrible day far more power than it deserved. Instead, I focused on the days we still had. Every Wednesday morning, I picked her up for breakfast. Every Friday afternoon, we'd drive through the countryside with no destination in mind, windows down if the weather cooperated. Sometimes we'd talk. Sometimes we'd just enjoy the quiet. At our age, silence isn't awkward. It's comfortable. One Sunday after church, Mom looked at me over lunch and smiled. "You seem lighter." "I feel lighter." "You finally put it down?" I guess I did. She reached across the table and patted my hand. Your father used to say that bitterness is like carrying a bag of rocks. The longer you hold it, the heavier it gets. I think he was right. He usually was. We both laughed. Dad wasn't perfect. None of us are. But he understood something I didn't fully appreciate until now. You can't build a peaceful life while dragging yesterday behind you. Every once in a while, someone asks me if I regret not helping Lisa that Sunday morning. It's a fair question. The answer is no. Not because I wanted revenge, and not because I wanted her to suffer. The ambulance reached Frank within minutes. He received the care he needed, and thankfully he recovered well. What happened that morning forced Lisa to experience, if only for a little while, the fear and helplessness she'd dismissed the day before. Sometimes life teaches lessons that no argument ever could. The divorce wasn't my revenge, it was my boundary. There comes a point when forgiving someone and continuing to live with them become two different decisions. I forgave her. I simply chose not to stay. Looking back, the greatest victory wasn't walking away from my marriage. It was walking toward a better life, toward my mother, toward good friends, toward neighbors who still believe in showing up when someone needs a hand. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. When someone shows you who they are during your hardest moment, believe them. But don't let that moment harden your own heart. The world already has enough people who look away. Be one of the people who pull over, open the car door and say, "Come on, I'll take you." If this story reminded you of someone or of a lesson life taught you the hard way, I hope you'll share it in the comments. And if you enjoy honest stories about family loyalty and second chances, I'd be honored if you subscribed and join me again next time.